You're watching News at Prime. Let's bring you this conversation now. The race for control of key metros is heating up as the 2026 local government elections draw ever so close. The Democratic Alliance has announced Haniff Hoosen as its mayoral candidate for the city of eThekwini, which is home to KZN's financial hub. That's the city of Durban. Hoosen is with me in studio now to discuss his plans for the city of eThekwini. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you very much for making time. I mean, you flew all the way from Durban to Johannesburg.
Well, I flew to see you and talk to the people who listen to us. So
good to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start with how close you think this is for you to grab a hold of. And I say it because of the recent election that we've just come through, national and provincial elections.
Yes.
Durban, the ANC only could achieve 17% of the vote there. So that's why I'm asking you the question, how close do you think this is for you to attain?
I think this is a watershed moment in our history. I really do believe it is. I think people have been let down by our government. It's been a long time coming. And I'm glad that more and more South Africans are actually moving towards supporting political parties based on their performance as opposed to loyalties. Because if we keep this thing about loyalty, South Africa is never going to grow. More and more South Africans have to wake up to the reality that if you want to hold politicians accountable, you're going to have to support them based on performance.
Let me ask you a little bit more about this question of performance.
Yes.
Do you think South Africans psychologically are now turning the corner and demanding more from politicians like yourself and indeed the accounting officers who actually run municipalities? If indeed that is your assessment moving forward, how clearly do you think this local government election is going to be about bread and butter issues, those service delivery matters that remain unresolved for months and years?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's easy to just speak about these things without evidence. So let me use an example in point that actually points to exactly what you're saying. Very recently, there was a by-election in Ward 64, there in eThekwini, a very difficult ward for the DA to win. We had major political parties contesting that election, but people abandoned their loyalties to political parties and they got behind the DA.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why that is happening, quite frankly and honestly, is that we have become, as the DA, experts in local government. Wherever people have given us that chance, we've done our very best to make sure that we deliver. Another evidence-based example, you'll remember 5 years ago, in Umgeni municipality, we won there by just 42 votes. So if 43 people stayed at home, it would have been in a mess still. It was completely bankrupt. In 5 years' time, today that municipality is now the best performing municipality in the entire KZN.
Yeah.
And I think that voters are starting to realize that this is not just about politics anymore. Local government is about service delivery. It's about the bread and butter issues.
Yeah.
So you could support your political party of your choice, but you have to vote for good governance if you want your cities to change.
Can I ask you this before we talk about your plans for the city of eThekwini? Do you anticipate an outright victory for the DA in Durban? Or, as Helen Zille put it, where you were seated last week, that she's hoping for a good enough figure to make them be the controlling majority in a coalition arrangement?
Look,
what is your honest opinion about what is possible?
Helen is not incorrect. She is quite correct. But I'll tell you what worries me. Is I don't want us to get to a situation in the city of Durban where we have an unstable coalition. We've seen in many cities how a government is there, 6 months later there's a new government, and then there's new systems, and then there's new budgets. And that takes longer for service delivery. What I really want to say to voters, actually, is help us to get over the line, give us the authority and the power to run the city so that we don't have to rely on deals and other political parties to get things done. We're going to try to get ourselves over the 50% mark. I'm not entering this race to come second, Toli. I want us to come first. But if we get to a coalition, I know that the DA will run a coalition based on those principles. But that's a matter that's a long time from now.
Yeah.
We're going to do our very best to make sure that we get full control of the city, because if voters give us that authority and that power, we can bring that change much faster.
The DA almost carries the race tag whenever the country goes into an election.
Yeah.
And that is that it is a party that favors white interests, and therefore it looks after suburban areas versus townships versus informal settlements. Do you think you are able to overcome that hurdle in Durban?
I think that we've reached a point in our history in this country where people have had enough of this race debate. And I'm glad that I'm alive to see it. And I think that more and more South Africans are actually starting to look beyond what we look like or what we speak like. I think more and more South Africans are asking, can you get the job done? When I become the mayor of this city, I will make sure that we respond according to the need, regardless of where it is. Mm-hmm. There is also this misconception that you have to invest only in certain areas. You have to do two things to run a city to get it right. You have to look after what you have, because if you don't maintain what you have, we're going to end up in the mess that we've got all over South Africa where pipes are bursting, because they haven't looked after the existing infrastructure. So we have to do two things: build new infrastructure for poorer communities and maintain the existing one. Or else 15 years from now, 20 years down the line, we'll be back in the same place where we are. We have to get those two things right. And that's the one balance that I'm convinced we can get right.
Well, you touch on infrastructure,
yeah,
and that's a sore point for particularly the people of Durban,
yeah,
coming out of the 2022 floods. The drainage systems were completely neglected.
Yeah.
And when those floods came, it simply decimated everything. And that's why you had raw sewage running into the sea, and a number of beaches after that were simply unusable. I wonder now how many of these beaches are indeed usable for domestic tourists and indeed international tourists. Infrastructure, how do you plan to deal with that?
Not much has changed, to be very honest. I used to be a member of parliament on the portfolio committee for cooperative governance. And just shortly after the floods, we conducted oversight in the city, and their response measures were so poor. It took forever for them to clean a street. The maintenance was a serious problem. And the cause of that problem is that they were investing the money in vanity projects as opposed to taking care of the infrastructure. So the way the city manages its funds has become problematic. I mean, just to give you one example. If you look into the Auditor General's report, about 4 years ago, there was about 700 million rand irregular expenditure. 4 years later, 4 billion. That city currently is sitting with a debt book of about 40 billion rand. They haven't collected that money. That's money you could use to repair the infrastructure. Yeah. So you're going to have to get the basics right. If you know how to invest that money and put it to work where you get the best value for money, it can be done. It's not impossible. I want to lead that fight to make sure we get it done.
When you talk about the use of money or putting the public purse to good use, the DA leader in KZN is in charge of the public purse there now, provincially.
Yes.
That's MEC Rogers.
That's correct.
Now, if he doesn't get things right in terms of departments spending monies where monies ought to be spent, look at what's going on in the education space in KZN.
Yeah.
Are the people that should be investigated there? If your answer is yes, at some point, residents are going to say this is a reflection on the DA as well, because you are effectively in government in KZN. Yes, it might not be at municipal level as in eThekwini specifically, but what I'm saying to you is that the DA cannot run away from always saying that we're in the opposition now. You are part of a government, both national, provincial. We're now going to see what's going to happen at city level. The use of financial resources for what it is intended. What's your plan?
Well, that's exactly the plan, is to get value for money, use the money for exactly what it is intended, its intended purpose. Local government is about basic service delivery. In the city of Durban, currently, the situation we sit with there, 60% of the water that the city buys is wasted into the ground, which means residents are paying double the amount of money that they should have been paying for the water, because somebody has to pay for it. So 60% of the water getting wasted, billions of rands. If we're not going to get that right, and that's our number one priority, is to get the basics right. Fix the water crisis, fix the sewer crisis, fix the roads, get rid of the potholes, get the tourists back. We've got the highest number of informal settlements in the country is in the city that I want to lead. And I want to make sure that we can start some way by at least eradicating as many of those informal settlements as possible. I believe it's possible if we can just use the money for what its intended purpose is. Not spending 2 million rand on a function as was done for Women's Day to feed the staff. I mean, that's complete wastage. Get the priorities right, put the money to work, invest it where it's supposed to be, you'll get the outcomes you want. But if you invest in wastage, things are going to fall apart.
Informal settlements that you've just referred to now, they are a problem throughout the country where there are cities that are economic hubs. Durban is one of them. You definitely see all of these settlements mushrooming all around the city center. What's your plan to making sure that they don't expand? If anything, you shrink them, but ensure that people, where you've allowed for them to exist, that there are basic services that are delivered.
The unfortunate reality in my city is that our city government adopts an attitude that they can wish them away. Those informal settlements have some of the most poorest people that exist. I mean, there are children who are growing up in absolute squalor. They have no dignity. I'm convinced we can change that situation around if we can start somewhere. And I think part of the other problem that a lot of municipalities have is that they don't have a revenue base that's actually increasing. The reason for that is that you've got large volumes of poor communities. So if you want to run a city where you can increase your revenue base, you have to invest in those people so that they'll have the ability to make a contribution. And I think on the long term, if we use that type of visionary approach in that city, where we can invest in communities who are poor and actually provide opportunities for them to become people who can make a meaningful contribution to society, on the long run, we'll be able to generate more revenue from those communities.
Talking about settlements, our coastal areas, coastal cities, coastal provinces, climate change is here.
Yes.
How do you make sure that people, yes, they build back, but as the saying goes, but they build back better. They basically build resilient structures that are going to withstand Mother Nature.
Are you referring to informal settlements?
Informal settlements, specifically because people who can build homes on their own, I think they're probably able to do that now, especially on the back of that 2022 experience.
Yeah, I think one of the saddest things is that poor communities who were living along the river banks, and when those banks burst, we lost so many people, which was really sad. And what I don't understand is how you can have a city government who knows that these risks exist and actually do nothing about it. So one of those priorities is going to have to be to actually place those communities in safer areas while we also at the same time develop them. You have the city currently spending about 120 million rand on those communities to help clean up the streams so that during heavy rains that you won't have water build up and damming of the rivers, because that's what actually causes the massive flooding. But all the money that they've been spending It wasn't proper management of it because those rivers are not clean. So there's no accountability for the money that is being spent. What they're actually doing is just handing out cash for political patronage. That doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. Finally, let me circle back to what we raised a little earlier.
Yeah.
And that's the race tag that almost always follows the DA. Sometimes you bring that to yourself. And I speak with Phoenix in mind.
Yeah.
2021, July unrest.
Yes.
That incident in Phoenix, the DA stood with the community that was seen as having perpetrated atrocities on black people of KZN, and that was seen as racial profiling. That was a difficult moment. Do you think the people have moved on from that period? Because you most certainly stood with the community of Phoenix. I remember even your leader right now, John Steenhuisen, went to Phoenix. But at some point you were trying to make amends, particularly for the posters that you had run on the back of that incident. I'm merely asking about social cohesion, social harmony, race relations. Is that something that is still a sore point? And how do you plan to build social cohesion?
Let me be honest and say I think those posters were a mistake. I think it inflamed tensions that already existed. You know, we live in a wounded society when you consider where we come from. And we have a responsibility, all of us as leaders, to make sure that what we do does not inflame those tensions. And with hindsight, we realized it was a mistake. And we apologize for that. I apologize for it again. And I think that's the mark of leadership. That when you make a mistake about it, you don't defend the indefensible. We remove those posters immediately when we realize the error that we made, and we apologize for it. And we have to make much greater investments and strides in bringing people together. Yeah. And so we must be much more careful about the way we communicate messages going forward.
Haniff Hoosen, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Hopefully you'll visit us again when the results...
When I'm the mayor.
Well, I'm not going to run ahead of myself, but hopefully we'll talk again after the results are announced. Haniff Hoosen,
thank you very
much. The DA's mayoral candidate for the city of eThekwini.